What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of UFC action. Hope you guys enjoyed your week off as much as I did, and we have a pay-per-view welcoming us back, UFC 287 for the middleweight championship out of Miami this Saturday. Alex Pereira, the defending champion now, against the man he took it from in November, Israel Adesanya. A battle not only for the championship, but both of these guys' legacies in combat sports since they fought each other 3 times now. Alex Pereira is up all 3 of those to 0 between kickboxing and mixed martial arts. So a pretty historic rematch here at middleweight. The co-main event at welterweight, Gilbert Burns versus George Masvidal. Fun matchup there between 2 big names, 2 exciting fighters. And overall, this fight card is pretty competitive between the matchups. There are some short notice replacement bouts, but 13 fights overall so far. And we've got a lot of money lines that just don't excite me a whole lot from a betting perspective. But I do like the overs and unders. And when the props drop, I think I'll be all over that more than just the money line side of things this week. But check back with me on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Time. On this channel, I'll be having my live stream panel that I co-host on the pay-per-view weeks with Couch Warrior Podcast, and joining us will be Lou Betya and Liam Picks Fights. So overall, just 3 guys I love breaking down fights with. Again, that's Wednesday this week at 9 p.m. Central Time. Right here on this channel, we'll have the props available to us, and we'll just be chopping it up with each other, breaking down our picks and predictions. But I'll point out the bets I do have so far, and man, before the break at UFC San Antonio, we just absolutely killed it. Went just shy of 12 units up on that night. The props were just kind of like a crystal ball as far as calling, split decisions. The Nate Landwehr round 2 sub came through pretty big for us. So overall, just a really good night of betting. And that was the biggest win so far this year. It was 11.98 units in one night. So going to try to replicate that success this weekend at UFC 287. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and let's break into the first fight of the night. First fight of the prelims, we've got Sam Hughes, who's returning to take on a debuting fighter this Saturday named Jacqueline Amorim. Amorim is a Brazilian submission specialist with power in her hands, and she's the current, I guess now the former strawweight champion in the LFA, where she went 4-0 in that promotion, all 4 round 1 stoppages. In fact, all 6 of the professional wins for the undefeated Jacqueline Amorim are round 1 stoppages. There's 5 submissions and 1 knockout. She's a world-class BJJ black belt. Amorim was a champion in both gi and no-gi jiu-jitsu tournaments. She has some freestyle wrestling experience as well, which you see on display in all of her fights. She usually takes her opponents to the mat pretty quickly, transitions to a dominant position, and taps them out. She has 1 knockout where she scored a 10-second one-punch knockout, which is just unnatural power at this weight class. So her striking we haven't seen for extended periods of time, but it seems pretty good from what we've seen. Sam Hughes is more of a generalist in the UFC, going 2-4 out of her 6 UFC bouts. So not a great record. And the times that she has scored victories was over Elise Reed by stoppage and over Pereira Rodriguez by a decision. She was able to out-wrestle both of those girls, but the 4 losses she was taken to the mat and ground out. So a 7-5 record for Hughes overall. She is the plus 200 underdog here. Even though she's a veteran of 6 UFC fights, they're giving all the respect to the 6-0 submission specialist. Jacqueline Amorim is the minus 235 favorite in her debut. So it's a steep price for somebody we've not seen leave round 1 before in mixed martial arts, but just due to her skill set and her experience in other sports, other martial arts, I'm not too worried about her conditioning. It seems to be okay from what I've seen. But yeah, if this gets extended, I mean, it could look drastically different than a minus 235 favorite price tag for Amorim. But since her skill set really fits into the weakness we've seen from Sam Hughes, if this stays standing, I think Sam Hughes certainly does have a chance, but I just don't think it's going to stay standing for very long. So I got to take Amorim here. The money line, when you look at the fights and you look at the skill set and just the athleticism difference, the power difference, minus 235 for Amorim doesn't look all that out of place, but it's just hard to back her at that price tag when she hasn't left round 1 yet. So I'm going to take Amorim. I'm going to say she wins by a submission in under 1.5 rounds. But what I like is the under 2.5 in this fight is minus 105. That's not a bad price. I'm going to be checking the props for Amorim by inside the distance finish and by submission. I like both of those spots here. Hopefully you can chop down that minus 235 money line. But give me Amorim. I think she's going to make a very successful debut Saturday night. Up next at featherweight, we've got a striker versus grappler matchup between Steve Garcia and Nuerdenbieke. This is the second time we're seeing Steve Garcia down at featherweight. He did have a successful featherweight debut last October, knocking out viciously, scoring like 3 knockdowns within 92 seconds of round 1 over Chase Hooper. So Hooper engaged in a kind of like a striking battle as the grappler. It was an odd decision, but Garcia just could not miss with his combinations. He is a very slick kickboxer, scoring 10 knockouts out of his 13 wins for Garcia across a few different weight classes. He's had some time in Bellator as well as now in the UFC, but the times he's struggled are against grapplers, good wrestlers. He's 3-3 in decisions as Garcia. All 3 of those decisions, one was in the UFC against Luis Pena, who controlled him, took the back and threatened submissions for like 13 minutes of a 15-minute fight, I should say. The other 2 fights were a loss by decision against Ricky Turcios, was able to out-wrestle him against the cage in Bellator, and Joe Warren in Bellator was able to score takedowns and dominate him over 3 rounds. So you've got to put that into consideration when he's taking on Nuerdenbieke, who's a Greco-Roman based wrestler, but good takedowns and slams from all angles. It's a good stylistic matchup, in my opinion, for Nuerdenbieke, who's a minus 200 favorite, plus 170 the underdog price on Steve Garcia. Where I could see this being a little bit closer, though, than that money line indicates is the fact that I think Steve Garcia is just a much more crisp and polished striker, way better striking output. And even though you're going to see a lot of experience from Nuerdenbieke with 39 wins and 10 losses, the Chinese 28-year-old spent a lot of time overseas in some, less than credentialed promotions where a lot of these guys didn't have a lot of good experience. So he fought very often early on in his career. He's been pretty durable through most of those times, but we did see him knocked out against Zhu Rong, who fanned out of the UFC pretty unsuccessfully. So he can be cracked. Steve Garcia certainly has the potential to win this fight as long as it stays standing. And if Nuerdenbieke fails to get the takedown until the later parts of the round, I could see Steve Garcia putting up enough points on the board to win a decision here and score the upset as the underdog. But I got to go with the stylistic matchup I see in front of me. I see Nuerdenbieke grounding this fight often, just racking up control time, maybe even getting a submission victory here. He does have 10 submissions out of his wins, but I'm going to go with a decision victory for Nuerdenbieke. Again, at minus 200 on the money line, I just think that there's a lot that could go wrong here. This could play out a lot closer because as long as it stays on the feet, I'm going to give the striking output and minute-winning ability to Steve Garcia. But overall, just give me Nuerdenbieke to brawl his way into range, get this fight to the mat, and secure a 3-round victory. Up next, we've got a catchweight bout at 160 pounds between Trey Ogden and Ignacio Bahamondes. This is a position where both guys are now facing a different opponent than intended initially. Nicholas Moda, a fellow striker, was taking on Bahamondes. He got injured and pulled out. And 2 weeks ago, Trey Ogden was taking on Manuel Torres, who had some medical issues on the day of the weigh-ins. So maybe some rehydrating issues or something like that. I'm not quite sure. But Bahamondes was a moderate to sizable favorite over Moda. Now he's a minus 290 favorite, an even bigger favorite. Plus 245 for Trey Ogden, who was an underdog that I was picking to win against Manuel Torres, mostly because I thought that Trey Ogden was more proven down the stretch of a fight, but that all changes now because you've got a massive 6'3", 25-year-old Ignacio Bahamondes who's been in the UFC 3 times now, going 2-1 in those, and actually had a successful Contender Series bout back in 2020 as well. So I've seen this guy be very good with the kickboxing out of both stances, powerful, and now showing very improved submission offense as well, getting a submission victory over Rong Zhu in his last fight. I believe he was defending the takedowns, and I think he got either a Bravo choke or an Anaconda. I'm not quite sure which one it was. I know that the Bravo choke goes from the armpit to the neck, and the Anaconda is the opposite. So I can't remember. I think it was a Bravo choke he got in round 3. But either way, he really knew what he was doing. He sunk it in quickly and got the tap. So this guy also had an amazing spinning wheel kick victory over Roosevelt Roberts. After defending all 12 takedown attempts from Roberts in that fight, he scored with 5 seconds left in round 3, a highlight reel spinning wheel kick knockout. So Trey Ogden has got his hands full in this matchup as primarily a grappler. I did say last time I broke down the fight, and I agree. Trey Ogden is a pretty Serviceable striker. He's got a very good ability to be defensively sound. Sticks and moves pretty well. Counter strikes effectively. Uses leg kicks. But I just think Bahamondes is on a much better level. And now with this massive size advantage he's going to have, and Trey Ogden's not a small lightweight either. So just a lot more danger from Bahamondes from now, not only the submission side of things, but also the just the kickboxing, just the counter striking, the offensive striking. He doesn't always use his reach the best, Bahamondes, but I think it's going to give Ogden issues in this fight. So I got to take Bahamondes. I'm not sure if I'm going to do anything with this money line because it is pretty wide, minus 290. I think he wins just being the younger fighter, the bigger fighter. I said the more dangerous fighter. Maybe there's some room for like an under in this spot. Let me see what the unders are. I don't even know what they are offhand. If it's set at over under 2.5 here, we could be looking at something. The unders and overs aren't even out yet for this fight. So that might be a way to play this. Maybe looking at the inside the distance props for Bahamondes. I'm not sure if we're going to get a big number on the submission prop or the knockout since he just got a submission in his last fight and he has 9 knockouts on his record. So Trey Ogden has never been knocked out before. He's been submitted a few times, so I'm not sure where they're going to line these props when they come out. Definitely be checking DraftKings for those when they do. And the overs and unders haven't dropped either, so I would probably look for the unders in this fight if it's a decent number, maybe close to like minus 150 at the worst, But overall, Bahamondes could just outpoint his way to a, stuff takedowns and outpoint his way to a 3-round decision here too. So I'm not quite sure how I feel. The prices will dictate that when the props drop, but give me Bahamondes pretty confidently to win. Another women's strawweight bout up next between Cynthia Calvillo and Lupita Godinez. We've got Cynthia Calvillo, who's 35 years old at this point. Once had a pretty good record in the UFC, but now she's on a 4-fight losing streak, now with a 9-5-1 draw record, coming off of last August's split decision loss to Nina Nunes, who came off of a long layoff, retired after that decision win over Cynthia Calvillo after a very boring, low-output fight where, Nina Nunes basically edged it out by moving forward a little bit more, throwing a little bit more, and just doing a little bit more with the leg kicks and just simple attacks like that to win a split decision. But she retired on the spot, already had one foot out the door, admitted that this whole UFC run was kind of a hobby for her and getting in the way of her starting more of a family. So not a good look to lose to a fighter like that. Calvillo, before that, quit on the stools in between rounds 2 and 3 against Andrea Lee. She got knocked out by Jessica Andrade, and she got just outpointed by Caitlin Chookagian. So even within some steps down in competition lately, she's still losing fights. And now moving back down to 115, where she's missed weight twice before, I'm just not liking anything from Calvillo in this fight, where at her best, she was a very good striker, good technique with her kickboxing, and she was a threat with the wrestling. But that was at her best. Now she's taking on Lupita Godinez, who's going to have more of an aggressive pace with the striking, more of an aggressive and success rate with the takedowns. She's got very good throws, a good judo and BJJ base for Godinez, who's only 29 years old at this point. So I know there's a lot of people that are kind of salty about Godinez last time she fought back on the same fight card as Calvillo last August. She took on veteran striker Angela Hill, and after having a successful round 1 with the striking, I think she stayed in that mode and managed to let the victory slip from between her fingers. And she attempted less takedowns in that than any fight in the past. She went like 8 for 8 on takedowns against Ariane Carnelossi, did Lupi Godinez. She attempted like 15 takedowns on Luana Carolina, attempted like 12 on Loma Lukbunmi, but she attempted, I think, 1 per round. And I don't think she got any of them against Angela Hill. So it was a big fight IQ mistake, and dropped the ball as like a minus 300 or more favorite that night. So at minus 250 on this fight, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be really hesitant to trust her at that number, but I think she gets the job done. I pointed out a lot of things going against Calvillo, especially this weight class at 115. She hasn't been at this weight class in a while, has Calvillo, and I don't think doing it at this point in her career is going to go very well. I bet she misses weight on Saturday, and I bet she loses by decision to Lupita Godinez. So you could try to chop down that money line on Godinez by betting her by decision when that prop drops, but even that I don't think would be, unless you're getting like plus money, which you're not going to get on that. it's hard to trust that Calvillo won't just like look for the door, look for the exit in this fight, quit on the stool again, or even get tapped out by Godinez, who has only gotten 2 finishes in her career out of her 11 fights. But yeah, I mean, that's how I would play this, is probably by decision, but the number would not be enough. You're probably going to get like a minus 150 or something for Godinez by decision. So we'll look at the prop when it drops, but give me Godinez pretty confidently to get the job done here by decision. Moving up to middleweight up next, we've got Gerald Meerschaert taking on Joe Pyfer. Gerald Meerschaert, a very good veteran of the UFC. I think 10 wins and 7 losses since 2016 when he made his debut. But he's got a lot of experience outside of that in general, going 35 wins and 15 losses. He's just a finisher in every sense with 6 knockouts and 27 submissions. A pretty good southpaw kickboxer is Gerald Meerschaert, but he's made his money off of his ground game, his ability to weather the early storm of a fighter and come back and drown them with smothering jiu-jitsu top pressure and get the submission. So Joe Pyfer is newer to the UFC, only 26 years old, and just made his debut last year against Alen Amedovski. So he gave Amedovski his 4th and final UFC loss by knockout in round 1, as many people expected he would. Amedovski had been finished in round 1 3 times in a row after that. And Joe Pyfer's got a pretty good physique for this weight class. He'll be an inch taller than Gerald at 6'2", and he's very athletic, good speed, and an ability to just do obnoxious amounts of damage very early with his strikes. Very good 1-2s, we saw that check left hook that he knocked out Ozzy Diaz with in round 2 in the Contender Series. And Joe Pyfer's very well-rounded, good wrestling and a good jiu-jitsu game in his own right. But I'm not sure if he's going to test that against Gerald Meerschaert. It would be a clear path to victory if he stayed on the feet and tried to overwhelm Gerald Meerschaert early in round 1. We've seen a lot of round 1 finishes from Joe Pyfer, but only 1 fight has actually gone to decision out of his, I think, 12 fights now. He's gone 10-2. So Joe Pyfer has been made most famous in the past year for being, I think, the only contract awarded on the first week of the Contender Series last August. So, you got the soundbite that'll live in fame for a while, the Be Like Joe Pyfer rant from Dana White that riled everybody up. But Joe Pyfer, there's still a lot to prove with this guy, man. Like, he hasn't really shown a lot of finishing potential later into a fight. There's a lot to be said about this big step up in competition, going from having 1 UFC fight against the worst guy in the roster in Amedovski, and now taking on Gerald Meerschaert, who's been in the UFC 17 times, only lost to ranked fighters. And he's only been finished by Khamzat Chimaev by strikes, Ian Heinisch, and Thiago Santos. So not bad names. And like I said, all of those guys were ranked at one point. So, I'm going to take Gerald Meerschaert here as an underdog. He's plus 160 on the money line. Joe Pyfer minus 190. But that's not how you play probably either of these guys, right? Like, Gerald Meerschaert is a finisher. He's never won a decision in the UFC. It's only been by either knockout. I think only 1 knockout was that body kick on Eric Spicely. The rest have all been submissions, many of them in round 3. So I'm going to be looking at the props for Gerald Meerschaert by submission. Look for him in round 3. Look for him by round 3 submission. That's just the plays. It's almost like a Yoel Romero play at this point. You just have to look for it. And, Joe Pyfer certainly has the potential to get a round 1 knockout. Meerschaert can be hittable early, a little bit slow to grow into the fight. And Joe Pyfer has shown us that he's got very good round 1 potential. I think all of his wins are under 1.5 rounds for Joe Pyfer. So not to say that he can't win a decision in this spot. He certainly could and would be the more likely of the 2 guys to do so. But, Joe Pyfer, he's got a lot of takedown offense and a lot of jiu-jitsu game that's going to be nullified against Meerschaert, who's just far better. So I'm going to call Gerald Meerschaert to pull another performance like he did in his last fight against Bruno Silva, in his fight a couple fights ago against Makhmud Muradov, where he weathers the early storm against a round 1 finisher and comes back in round 2 or 3 to get the submission win. And Gerald Meerschaert's been at Killcliff FC for his past few camps now. Been making improvements. His wrestling looks a little bit more refined. He's more eager to wrestle early than he has been in the past. So I see a lot going for the veteran here, and I'm surprised he's this big of an underdog. So give me Gerald Meerschaert to score the round 3 submission yet again. We've got a short notice heavyweight bout up next between Carl Williams and Chase Sherman. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have Chris Barnett taking on Chase Sherman, which would have been an iconic matchup for the history books, but instead we've got Carl Williams filling in on very short notice here after making his successful debut just 3 weeks ago. Come Saturday night, it'll be 4 weeks exactly for the turnaround of Carl Williams, who defeated Lucas Brzezinski in his debut by a dominant 3-round decision. Williams, a very athletic guy, a former light heavyweight, good wrestling, and pretty technical striking as well. When he's not totally tired, he never gets himself out of position. Good linear strikes, and he did actually drop Lucas Brzezinski in round 2, knocked him down. Just took him down, I think, like 8 times out of 13 attempts. So it was a dominant performance. There are some worries here in this fight against Chase Sherman, who, let's face it, Chase Sherman is one of the worst fighters that's ever been in the UFC. I think he's 2-5 in his last 7 UFC fights, only winning over Ike Villanueva and Jared Vanderaa. Both guys have been cut from the promotion. So even his wins are not impressive ones. He's pretty much a knockout or bust in round 1 type of guy. 15 knockouts out of his 16 wins for Chase Sherman, but most of those wins were not in the UFC. So any guy who wants to employ a wrestling game plan, a takedown offense game plan, they can usually ground Chase Sherman and wear him out. But the thing about Carl Williams is he's a minus 390 to a minus 500 favorite over Chase Sherman on short notice, and Carl Williams is a former light heavyweight, so he's going to be giving up probably about 15 to 20 pounds come fight night over Chase Sherman, who weighed in at 256 last time he fought, and Carl Williams was 240 just a few weeks ago. So that worries me a bit. We did see Carl Williams sort of gas out at the end of that Brzezinski fight, but I mean, that's going to happen when you're throwing around a massive dude who outsizes you, and you have to keep on wrestling him and taking him back down to the mat. But that's part of the issue with Carl Williams. He's not the best finisher, right? No submissions, only 3 knockouts. Even when Brzezinski was dead tired in that matchup, Carl Williams couldn't put him away. So if Chase Sherman's going to be around in round 3, we did see against Jared Vanderaa, he still has hand speed and the ability to knock out at least somebody in round 3. So that worries me if Carl Williams gets tired and cannot put Chase Sherman away as this fight goes. I mean, it's unlikely, but when you're looking at a minus 500 favorite, you got to consider these things going wrong. So just because of the lack of finishing potential, I don't even know how to play this from like a time prop perspective either. The unders or the overs, I don't really know. I'm going to call Carl Williams comes in here and gets another dominant wrestling-based performance over a 3-round decision. So give me Carl Williams by decision here. Not much I really, can see myself doing betting-wise here, unless the props really expose something pretty juicy, like, I don't know, like a DraftKings same-game parlay on Williams to win and him to score like, a takedown or 2 takedowns or more. Maybe that's something I can look at when they drop on DraftKings, but give me Williams by decision. Another women's strawweight bout up next. I'm just realizing how many of these there are on this card. I think this is the 3rd one, and the final women's 115 bout between Michelle Waterson-Gomez and Luana Pinheiro. This is an old versus new matchup here. We've got Michelle Waterson-Gomez at 37. The karate hottie has been in the UFC for 12 fights, going 6-6, and before that she had a title run in Invicta as well. She's a solid striker, maintains distance well with the karate strikes, good lead side kicks, good kicks from all angles in general. Very high output striking, good cardio, and she has always implemented grappling offensively as well. So Luana Pinheiro, that's really her bread and butter, a lifelong judo practitioner, good head and arm throws, hip tosses. But she's got aggressive striking as well. She's got some power in her hands. She can be a little bit one at a time with her striking, Pinheiro, but when she does blitz forward with vicious hooks, you can see the result in her Dana White Contender Series bout where she took out Stephanie Fausto by round 1 knockout pretty early. So she's able to do that. She's done that, I think, one other time as well. 2 knockout victories, 5 submissions, 1 DQ victory that she took over Ronda Marcos in her debut. But overall, Pinheiro is 10-1, and even that 1 loss was a pretty questionable and controversial split decision early on. So Pinheiro is the younger fighter here by quite a big margin at 29 years old. She's the minus 160 favorite over the veteran Michelle Waterson, who's plus 140, the underdog. And I'm a little bit surprised that the money line isn't at least like a pick'em or closer, just because I think that there's a lot of advantages for Michelle Waterson here. For one, she's got the cardio advantage most likely. She's got the ability to go for a 5-round pace and still be high output. And we've seen Pinheiro actually kind of slow down her fight against Sam Hughes. In the middle of that fight, she was slowing down quite a bit. Sometimes when she has to toss her opponent, hip toss them repeatedly and they keep getting back up, she can get tired, as anybody would. So I could just see Michelle Waterson maintaining distance and cutting angles very well, staying away from the blitzing attacks of Pinheiro, staying away from the takedown threat. Michelle Waterson has not been that great in her last 5 fights, going 1-4, but this is her first big step down in competition. You know, she last got round 2 subbed by Amanda Lemos, who's a very tough test. You know, so yeah, I don't know. I just really think that Michelle Waterson is live here. I'm not eager to play from a betting perspective a 37-year-old strawweight, but I think that there's value on this line, and you could even maybe chop this down when the props drop by taking Michelle Waterson by decision, because she's reliable to do that. She's only got 2 victories into the distance in the UFC. One was against Angela Magana way back in the day, and one was against Paige Van Zandt. So neither of those 2 women are, you know, very good UFC fighters with much success, and that was the only 2. I think both were submission wins for Michelle Waterson. So one more thing about Pinheiro is we've never really seen her tested when she's on the defense of a grappling threat. Like if Waterson could end up on top position, you know, maybe counter one of the throws and end up on top of Pinheiro. Is the guard of Pinheiro that dangerous? You know, she does have some arm bars victories, but you know, I don't know if Michelle Waterson's going to fall victim to that. So, you know, that's one thing I really do question. Could Michelle Waterson actually implement some of her own grappling in this matchup and be successful? So I'm going to take Waterson-Gomez to, you know, give a vet lesson here, outstrike and outpoint Pinheiro, and probably just do more work on the feet than Pinheiro was able to do work on the ground. So not something I intend to really play from a betting perspective, I don't think, but give me Waterson-Gomez to get the upset. Middleweight bout up next between Kelvin Gastelum and Chris Curtis, one of my more anticipated matchups on this entire fight card because of how close this matchup could potentially be, and the bookies agree it's a close fight. Chris Curtis was slightly favored in this matchup, I think mid last week, and then it switched around the weekend where now Chris Curtis is the plus 110 underdog, Kelvin Gastelum the minus 130 favorite. So matchup-wise, it's pretty intriguing. Both guys are on the smaller side for the weight class at 185. You've got Kelvin Gastelum, who's 5'9", and Chris Curtis, who's 5'10", but he's actually fought at welterweight in the past. You've got Gastelum, who's got more high-level experience in the UFC, but you've got Chris Curtis, who has more total experience, having fought as a professional pretty much every major promotion, including the PFL, Bellator, and now in the UFC. He's, I think, 4-1. Often coming through as an underdog and often finishing the fight even after he loses the early portions of the fight. So Chris Curtis coming off of that successful round 2 knockout over Joaquin Buckley as an underdog and doing just that. He got outstruck in round 1, came through and found the big strike, countered off of the kick of Joaquin Buckley and put him out with one punch and just a few subsequent ground strikes. Out cold, cashed as an underdog. Just like he did against Phil Hawes in his debut. He got outstruck in round 1, managed to find, some, I want to say like a counter strike to the head and then some, maybe like a knee or a kick to the body that finished off Phil Hawes in that fight. Pretty awesome stuff. Same thing against Brendan Allen. Managed to get a round 1 knockout and then stuffed all of the takedown attempts of Rodolfo Vieira and outstruck him to a decision win. Where we saw him falter was against Jack Hermanson, who was able to just put up a better pace, not really engage in a nasty brawl with Chris Curtis, and was just able to really just outstrike him. And even though it was on short notice for Chris Curtis, he was not able to come through with that victory. So we did see him get frustrated. We saw him sort of fade as the fight went on and got further out of his grasp. And I could see that happening here because, like I said, Chris Curtis often relies on landing the knockout punch to win. He's got 17 knockouts out of his 30 wins. 12-7 in decisions. But on the Kelvin Gastelum side, I mean, this guy is a pretty good counter striker in his own right and a very solid wrestler. And we haven't had a chance to really see that wrestling used too much. The most we saw it was against Ian Heinisch in his last win a few fights ago. He scored, I think, like 6 takedowns out of not many more attempts, maybe like 10 attempts against Ian Heinisch, able to ground him, get himself out of harm's way. And that's really a big part of this fight is if Chris Curtis lands the bigger shots, damages Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum recovers quickly. He's never been put out by strikes, and he has the ability to wrestle himself out of a bad situation. So we've seen that give Chris Curtis some issues in the past. Kelvin Gastelum, a guy who's had to fight, just really tall, powerful guys. Jared Cannonier in his last fight over 5 rounds, able to damage him and outstrike him. Avoid the takedown offense. You have Robert Whitaker, a former champion, who's just a better well-rounded mixed martial artist, a better wrestler, a better boxer, pieced him up over 5 rounds. Before that, Jack Hermanson just kind of pulled a sneaky heel hook on him in round 1. Darren Till before that was a little bit less. That's a little bit less forgivable, but before that it was Adesanya. So, the one layup that they gave him in Ian Heinisch, that was a winnable fight. He took that. This is also a winnable fight for Kelvin Gastelum. So, losing 5 of his last 6, I'm not really rushing to bet him at this point yet. I'm kind of undecided, but I do think Kelvin Gastelum should be able to score a decision win here. Just stay durable and hopefully mix in some wrestling. If he does that, he's set. Even if this stays striking on the feet, I could see Kelvin Gastelum outstriking Chris Curtis, but that would be a lot closer of a fight, right? You could have the more eye-catching combinations being countered by Chris Curtis, and then Kelvin Gastelum just moving forward, using leg kicks and things like that, varying up the targets a bit more. But again, Chris Curtis uses that very high defensive guard, really shields up his face, leaves the body open. Kelvin Gastelum likes to attack the body, likes to attack the legs, and that would be an awesome way to level change too. You strike up top, get Curtis, with the high guard, and then, take his hips and get the takedown. So give me Kelvin Gastelum to play a more well-rounded game here and get the decision win and snap this loss streak. Kicking off the main card at bantamweight, we've got Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Christian Rodriguez. A battle between 2 young fighters here at the weight class, and Rosas Jr., the youngest in history at 18 years old, 7-0, undefeated grappler, unbelievable talent, coming off of his first UFC fight and his first UFC win. Only took him 2 minutes and 44 seconds to sink in a rear naked choke on Jay Perrin back in December. So Jay Perrin, not the best UFC fighter, but a solid test for an 18-year-old debuting UFC fighter. Jay Perrin was like a 10-6 record, well-rounded, mostly a striker and boxer, but a pretty good generalist with good regional experience. And yeah, he had no answer to the takedown threat and just the submission offense of Raul Rosas Jr. But Rosas Jr., his striking is still a mystery to us. We see him pump out the jab, maybe throw some kicks out there just to, fluster his opponent, get them thinking, just distract them from the inevitable takedown threat that they know is coming. So Rosas Jr. is so physically strong and impressive for 18 years old. It's just insane. Slick back take, really tight squeeze with his chokes, and a tight body triangle as well. And more impressive than that at 18 is his patience to maintain a position over just jumping for a submission, not using his ego, but using his brain most of the time. So I think Rosas Jr. is about the same money line he was when he fought Jay Perrin a couple months back. He's a minus 225 favorite. Christian Rodriguez, a plus 190 underdog. And Rodriguez is 25 years young as well, so both fighters could still be improving fight to fight drastically. But Christian Rodriguez, 8-1, not the best resume as far as the experience level of his opponents, but a finisher nonetheless. He's got 3 knockouts and 4 submissions, 1-1 in his decision results, and he's 1-1 in the UFC as well. He went on a short notice fight against Jonathan Pierce, and even though he did have some striking success on the feet, Jonathan Pierce able to take him down, I think, like 6 or 7 times and grind out a decision over him. But most recently, Joshua Weems came in on short notice against Christian Rodriguez, and then that was able to, allow Christian Rodriguez to get his first victory in the UFC. But he was taken down by Weems like 2 or 3 times as well. Finally able to win the fight by switching from a guillotine to defend the takedown, transitioning that into an anaconda and getting the tap. So, there is some BJJ know-how from Christian Rodriguez, but I'd say his best strength is in his efficient kickboxing technique. I just really don't think there's going to be much to offer, though, because Rodriguez is going to have to be so timid to throw kicks and to really overextend, because he knows that takedown offense is coming from Rosas Jr., who is so dominantly strong and relentless with that chain wrestling attempts. So I'm going to take Rosas Jr. very confidently here. He's won me over. I really do believe that minus 225 is actually a decent number, and I did pay that price. I think I put 2.5 units on him, to win a little over 1 for Rosas Jr. I'll be looking at his inside the distance props as well. The submission prop might not have a lot of value since the cat's kind of out of the bag with that game plan. He's got 5 subs out of his 7 wins, but I just really do think that The mystery of his striking is going to be uncovered at some point, but I think this is a low enough level test for Rosas Jr. to once again just maul somebody to the ground to get the tap. So I'm not sure at what point. There's something to be said about the Christian Rodriguez submission defense. Maybe he's able to hold off Rosas Jr. until later in this fight, maybe even until a decision loss, but I think Rosas Jr. wins one way or the other. Welterweight bout up next between Kevin Holland and Santiago Ponzinibbio. It should be a fun matchup between two guys who are very powerful, dynamic strikers, good finishers at the weight class, and both are pretty large for 170 as well. 6 foot tall, pretty muscular physique for Ponzinibbio, who's 36 at this point, and Kevin Holland, who's 6'3", a massive 81-inch reach for the weight class. The former middleweight, now turned welterweight, is only 30 years old. So a big youth advantage. Every tail of the tape measurable advantage goes for Kevin Holland, who's a very creative striker, powerful guy, and just a loose and relaxed counter striker. And a solid grappler as well. If the fight gets to the mat, he's got good submissions. A BJJ black belt for both guys, I believe. But more of the stalking, plodding forward type of pressure fighter from Ponzinibbio, who's largely a boxer with the hands, looking to pressure and back his opponent against the cage. Kevin Holland is more of, he'll probably concede, play the outside game, and try to counter-strike effectively, which I think is going to be pretty effective for him in this matchup. But it is so hard to back Kevin Holland. I'm surprised he's showing his face in Florida this Saturday again after the disgraceful, unforgivable, just ridiculous performance against, embarrassing really, against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at UFC Orlando last December, where, you had Kevin Holland, who, of course, you're going to test the waters against the kickboxer in Stephen Thompson, who's, 40, 41 years old at the time. I can understand testing your skill against him in the striking for, the first half of a round, the first round. If it goes well for him, I think he landed some powerful shots early. But once the fight starts getting away from you in a 5-round fight, for God's sake, use your grappling, use a well-rounded MMA game. Don't just kickbox, to no end. And what made it even more rage-inducing was the fact that he got Thompson to the ground on a couple of occasions and just stood right back up. Didn't employ ground and pound, didn't look for a submission, didn't ride out control time to win. He chose to lose that fight and really deserved the ass-kicking he got and the TKO stoppage between rounds 4 and rounds 5. So that was at least a consolation prize. I did bet on Kevin Holland. That's why I'm salty. It was a bad bet, and I'm still kicking myself for that. So not over it just yet. But, not only that, I mean, even when I've bet against Kevin Holland, like Marvin Vettori, Derek Brunson, it just seems like this guy has mental lapses and just stops trying at a certain point in the fight. So things have looked better for him down at welterweight, scoring the round 2 stoppages over Cowboy Oliveira and Tim Means. We can forgive the Khamzat Chimaev loss. That's going to happen to most people who fight Khamzat, much less on short notice. So really, I'm just judging Kevin Holland based on that last performance. It's just very hard to back him at minus 240 here. Ponzinibbio at plus 200. But I think it's the right money line. I think it's the right side. Like I said, all of the tail of the tape advantages, the youth advantage, and I think Kevin Holland can counter-strike effectively from the outside. Probably catch Ponzinibbio with something pretty devastating on the feet, maybe like a counter left or something like that, followed up with some subsequent strikes in the ground, and probably win by a round 2 TKO or a decision. Ponzinibbio does have some wrestling. He does have some grappling, but he doesn't use it enough or early enough for me to trust that game plan. Ponzinibbio, you've seen him try at the last second to take down Jeff Neal after losing some of the bigger moments. More recently against, who am I thinking about? Michel Pereira. I think he tried the same thing, tried to take him down at the last second when he was losing the fight. So I think this does play out a little bit more like the Michel Pereira fight, where you've got the loose, more dynamic striker in Kevin Holland just pot-shotting from the outside and scoring more as the fight goes on. So I'm going to call a round 2 TKO for Kevin Holland, but I could see this being a decision just as equally, and Kevin Holland getting his hand raised. So I'm not going to trust him at minus 240. Maybe there's some finish props that would make sense in this spot, but give me Kevin Holland to get his hand raised. Bantamweight bout up next between Rob Font and Adrian Yanez. A super fun matchup between two guys who have slick and very technical boxing between the two of them. Rob Font, a lot more high-level UFC experience, more UFC experience in general. And Adrian Yanez, a 5-0 flawless record in the UFC so far with 4 finishes out of those. So more of the finisher at the UFC level so far is Yanez, but a lot more experience, and especially 5-round experience for Rob Font, who's 35 years old at this point. Font is coming off of that 5-round decision loss to Marlon Chito Vera last August. And even though he outstruck Marlon Vera like 271 to 159 in significant strikes over 5 rounds, hugely outstruck him in terms of output. He was knocked down, I think, 3 times in that fight, almost finished on a few occasions, and his face wore so much damage from just the vicious knees and kicks and counter punches of the more powerful Marlon Vera. So that's happened recently to Rob Font before. I think it was December of 2021. He fought Jose Aldo in a 5-round headlining fight, and he lost that fight by decision as well, having I think outstruck Jose Aldo, but it was just the ends of the rounds where he dropped the ball and Jose Aldo was able to knock him down, take him down, things like that, and just steal those rounds with damage. So Rob Font, he does have a very high striking output and probably will outstrike Yanez in this fight, win or lose, but Yanez is the guy who's going to be looking to mix up more of the more than just the boxing, right? He's more of a brawling boxing style, good technique and hand speed, but he's looking to really engage in a close quarters war, hide kicks and knees behind the punches, which he's had success knocking people out with. And Yanez is only 29 years old at this point. Like I said, 5-0 in the UFC, coming off of the round 1 knockout over Tony Kelly. So that was a pretty brutal knockout sequence there. He showed his accuracy and his power. Rob Font, I think, can mix things up a little bit more, though, right? He's got more of the ability to wrestle offensively, and that's given Yanez trouble in probably, I think, all of his losses. So Yanez is 16-3 as a pro. His 3 losses coming by way of decision. He's never been finished. Neither man has been finished officially by strikes, but the last time we saw Yanez really struggle with a takedown offense that cost him the fight was against Miles Johns in the LFA. Yanez was able to thwart off a lot of the takedowns, but he was not able to get himself off the cage. He was always defending, ended up losing a close decision to Miles Johns. Domingo Pilarte also had success taking him down in the LFA as well. I think Rob Font can do that because Yanez has not really fought a lot of guys who are looking to take him down in the UFC so far. So that's yet to be shown, but we're going to give the power, the youth, and just like the undefeated momentum and confidence to Adrian Yanez, but going to give the better defense to Rob Font. He's far less hittable. Of course, the experience, the 5-round cardio, the striking output, and we'll give the wrestling offense all to Rob Font. So this is going to be a spot where as long as Rob Font can avoid getting visibly hurt, knocked down, wobbled, as long as the big eye-catching shots do not define the rounds, I think Rob Font can successfully, employ a well-rounded game plan here and outstrike Yanez, win the minutes of this fight, and over 3 rounds. This is his first 3-round fight in a while, so I think Rob Font can do enough to find himself a decision win here. Again, not the biggest finisher in the UFC, so I'm going to call Rob Font to win this by decision. I'm very surprised that the money line is where it is. You've got minus 185 for Yanez and Rob Font at plus 160, the underdog. So at that price tag, I did put 1.5 units on the underdog to win here. Co-main event at 170 between Gilbert Burns and George Masvidal. A very fun welterweight matchup in the co-main because we got 2 pretty well-known names, 2 guys who are exciting finishers, and 2 guys with a lot in common, a lot of common opponents in the welterweight division. Damian Maia comes to mind, Stephen Thompson comes to mind, and most notably, they both got knocked out by Kamaru Usman in their unsuccessful title shots within the past couple of years. So Gilbert Burns, we just saw him fight just a little over 2 months ago. Round 1 submission by arm triangle over Neil Magny in Brazil at UFC 283. Impressive stuff there. A good comeback victory before that, Gilbert Burns lost to Khamzat Chimaev by decision in a 3-round epic war. Impressive enough for anybody to take Khamzat Chimaev to a decision for the first time, and even more impressive that Burns made it very close. So I give him a lot of credit. I was more impressed by that performance than a lot of them, just from how dangerous and talented Khamzat Chimaev is. But before that, Gilbert Burns, he did have a successful time with Wonderboy Thompson, but the unsuccessful, of course, knockout loss against Usman was recent as well. So George Masvidal has not tasted victory in a long time himself. 38 years old for Masvidal at this point. Makes a lot of sense since He's 35 wins and 16 losses as a pro. I mean, he's fought everywhere for a long time, been a pro since the early 2000s. So a lot more fight miles on him than the 36-year-old Gilbert Burns. Masvidal is on a 3-fight losing streak. Before that, a 3-fight winning streak that revolutionized his career. The Darren Till round 2 knockout in London, iconic moment. He had the 5-second, flying knee knockout over Ben Askren, iconic moment. And of course, kind of the circus fight against Nate Diaz, a round 3 TKO stoppage. Another iconic moment, really, with The Rock walking out the BMF belt for what that's worth. But that was the last time, late 2019, the last time we saw Masvidal's hand get raised. Dominantly beat over a 5-round decision to Usman, knocked out badly for the first time by Kamaru Usman, and then losing by, just getting wrestle-effed, for lack of a better term, by Covington. So, that's going to happen to George Masvidal. All of his recent decision losses are him getting out-wrestled. Covington, Usman, Stephen Thompson was actually able to just, strike him at range. Damian Maia able to, ground him and put him in all sorts of trouble for the majority of that 3-round fight. Benson Henderson, a few fights before that, I remember sticking out as a 5-round, pretty close decision loss due to the grappling. So, always going to be the bane of the existence of George Masvidal, and that's not going to change at 38. It's only going to get worse. So Gilbert Burns, world champion level BJJ, submission threat as we've seen, 9 submissions out of his wins, and an explosive striker as well. But we've seen Burns get hurt a couple of times. One was to Usman, and one was at lightweight to Dan Hooker. So he has been put out. There is a potential for George Masvidal, turn back the clock a bit here and get a knockout. But I think more often than not, we're going to see the really talented wrestling game of Gilbert Burns, well-timed takedowns, accurate, and then he's got the submission potential to, end the fight there as well. And I think he does. He's a minus 465 favorite over George Masvidal. Could be a bit much because that'll look drastically different. If this stays standing for 3 rounds, I think Masvidal has a very good chance of winning here, but it's not going to. So give me Gilbert Burns pretty confidently. I do have him parlayed up with somebody later on next week's card. And yeah, I mean, in fact, Gilbert Burns, now that I'm thinking about it, his only losses at welterweight are to Kamaru Usman, the former champion, and Khamzat Chimaev, who is quite possibly a future champion. So a good stylistic matchup here, as there's been a lot on this card. Stylistic matchup for the wrestler. And, give me Gilbert Burns to win inside the distance by submission. Okay, we made it all the way to the main event of the fight card. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and let's break into this awesome middleweight championship bout between the reigning defending champion, Alex Pereira, as he faces a very familiar opponent in Israel Adesanya, the man he took the belt from last November by round 5 standing TKO. A very close matchup upon rewatching it. And these guys are no strangers. They fought twice in their pro kickboxing days where Pereira, once again, he knocked out Israel Adesanya the first time, won a close decision the second time, and now in mixed martial arts, he beat him once again by stoppage. So he's got to be brimming with confidence, holding the gold around his waist now. And Alex Pereira is very underexperienced compared to most champions, right? He's only 7-1 as a professional at this point, whereas Adesanya is now 23-2 as a pro. So Israel Adesanya, one of the best middleweights to ever do it. A very big matchup for him, and he still finds himself the favorite here as a minus 140 favorite. The defending champion, the underdog, which is usually rare to see at plus 120 for Alex Pereira. And I could see this fight playing out just as close as it did the first time, maybe even closer. There's only a couple of instances where Israel Adesanya really was able to gain the respect of Pereira, who continued to stalk him down repeatedly over the course of those 20 or so minutes of that fight. At the end of round 1, if that was extended, Israel Adesanya maybe could have put Alex Pereira away back in November, landing like a counter right cross, a couple of subsequent punches. He really rattled Pereira, but then the bell rang, and it was in between rounds 1 and rounds 2, so Pereira got to recover. But after that, he shook off the cobwebs, was able to continue stalking down Israel Adesanya, who really appeared fearful of everything coming his way, and for good reason. Pereira is the much more physically imposing man. He's going to weigh a good 20 or so pounds more on fight night than Adesanya, and it shows in his physique that he really could be, he is a former light heavyweight. He could be a heavyweight if he wanted to. And even the simple things like a jab or strikes to the body kicks. I mean, all of those were having very devastating effects on Adesanya when they landed, made him very timid, and he was always on the defense the entire time, only escaping bad situations by clinching up. So there's still, we mentioned like the lack of experience for Pereira. There's still a lot of room for him to improve as a mixed martial arts fighter. I think he can make a lot of improvements here, just as Adesanya probably wants to make improvements in his own offensive grappling. But with the size of Pereira, with the training with a guy like Glover Teixeira, I think that he can just as equally make defensive grappling improvements as well as Adesanya can make offensive ones. So I think this is going to stalemate itself out. It's going to be another kickboxing match where Adesanya has more of the bigger array of weapons, more counter-striking options, more output and activity, but ultimately going to be on his back foot and having to avoid the power strikes from the more dangerous Alex Pereira. So I think Pereira is going to be even more confident to take some risks here, stalk down his prey, and I think he's going to find the mark on Adesanya and probably win more of the impactful moments in this fight, and then you're going to have Adesanya with more of the striking offense and more of the clinch offense, just like the first fight. So I will not be surprised if this goes into round 5 and each guy is up 2 rounds, and the judges have to weigh the eye-catching, damaging strikes, lacerations, swelling on the face of Adesanya versus all of the points and minute winning that Adesanya employed. So I think this is going to play out close. I'm going to side with the underdog, the champion, to retain his belt, Alex Pereira. I think this will go to a split decision, and it's going to be just a battle of, like I said, the output, the diversity of striking targets for Adesanya versus the power of the more dangerous Alex Pereira. So give me Pereira to win by split decision. I might even look and see what that prop is. Just the fight goes to split and then play both guy by split. I'm convinced it might be that close. But what I like the most in this fight is not picking a side. I like the overs, the alternate overs, over 2.5 at minus 225 on Bovada, the over 3.5 at minus 150 on Bovada, and the over 4.5 at plus 100 on BetOnline right now. I've played all of those, and I like that option a lot more than I like picking a side here, because I think it plays out close. Both guys are going to be very timid to open up early, not make the first mistake, and ease their way into this fight. So I think we cruise past halfway through the third round, halfway through the fourth round, and I think it does go to a close decision. So give me Alex Pereira to defend his belt by just being the more powerful, dangerous man and landing more impactful shots. Okay, there you have it, you guys. All 13 fights broken down for UFC 287. Pereira versus Adesanya 2. And like I mentioned at the top, check back here on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Time. I'll be having the panel where I have Couch Warrior Podcast co-host with me as we welcome Lou Betya and Liam Picks Fights back onto my channel to talk fights. Very smart people in that panel, so I can't wait to chop it up with them. See where we line up and see what bets we can give out to you guys. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. Cheers.